Good morning and welcome to day 2 of the School Facilities Management Virtual Conference and Expo and today's opening session, State Update, COVID Guidelines and Procedures. Before we begin, it's our pleasure to recognize one of our diamond sponsors this morning, NYSER. NYSER has been a partner and friend of our School Facilities Association for many years. We truly value and appreciate their support and welcome Brett Carruthers for a few welcoming remarks.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of the virtual SFA conference. Thank you to everybody that stopped by our booth virtually yesterday. It was great to see you. It was great to talk to you. Normally during this time, we recognize and present our scholarships. Unfortunately, this year in the virtual environment, we can't do that. So we're certainly looking forward to doing that next fall. I want to take a moment and thank all of you for the support that you give to the risk management team throughout the year. Your support lends to the success of all of us, and we certainly appreciate all that you do to make our jobs easier. As we reflect back to March 13th, and we look forward to where we are today, all of you have overcome substantial challenges. I mean, the challenges to reopen school this fall have been monumental. Frankly, it makes some of the capital project crunch that all of you experienced in your careers a cakewalk. So as I think about that and I think about where we are and where we've been, I came up with an equation for that. D plus D equals DM. Well, what does that mean? So my equation is when we take diligence and determination, we come up with what you are, and that's difference makers. You do that each and every day for every one of your districts. Thank you for all that you do. As we start, as we come to a close, I want all of you to please stay safe, stay well, and remember, you are awesomeness. Thank you so much. Have a great day today. Take care.
Thank you again, Brett, and thank you to our partners at NYSER. Now to introduce our speakers. Dr. Christina Coughlin is Assistant Commissioner for School Governance, Policy, and Religious and Independent Schools at the New York State Education Department. She has nearly 20 years experience in New York State education finance and currently manages NYSED's Office of Facilities Planning, the Office of Educational Management Services, and the State Office of Religious and Independent Schools. Dr. Coughlin earned a bachelor's degree in economics from Williams College. She earned a master's in educational administration and policy from the University of Chicago and a doctorate in sociology from the same university. Julie M. Marlette is a government analyst at Hinman Straub. Prior to that, she spent 6 years as Director of Governmental Relations at the New York State School Boards Association, where she had the opportunity to work with SFA on several policy issues. Prior to her time at school boards, Julie worked for both the Senate and the Assembly in a variety of policy positions, many in the area of education, and spent a number of years in leadership roles in statewide and national nonprofits. We're grateful that they can both be with us here this morning. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Christina and Julie.
Good morning. Thank you, Robin. Appreciate that, and I'm very glad to be here. Julie, did you want to make any opening remarks, or should I just start up?
Take it away, Christina.
Thanks. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to talk about the reopening guidance and questions that have arisen since. My team and I at SED are very interested in knowing the places, learning from what we've learned thus far and building that into revised guidance and finding more opportunities to help school districts keep kids safe in their buildings. And it was, so I'm always glad for this kind of conversation. And I was particularly glad when my friend Julie asked me to participate today. So, because we have known each other for a long time, both professionally and socially, but I don't know that we've had the opportunity to do something like this before. So this is first for us too.
So thanks, yes. I was also really happy to have the opportunity to talk to you about this, although I felt a little overwhelmed by the experience in trying to put our thoughts together, given the depth and breadth and the ever-evolving and changing nature of the guidance. Well, Christina and her team at SED have done a yeoman's work in staying on top of it and responding to ever-changing circumstances. As you all know, probably far better than I, we're also talking about dealing with the input and guidance of the Department of State, the Department of Health, executive orders, Department of Labor from time to time, and SED is, I think, the funnel through which a lot of that is coming out to the field. And so we really talked about stylistically wanting to keep this as, free-flowing and organic conversation as possible. So please don't feel like you need to wait to the end. We want to know specifically what you'd like to hear more about, because the questions that we receive run the gamut from reporting to cleaning to testing to transportation to who is and isn't an essential worker. And so we will certainly touch on some high points. We just wanted to urge you to jump in and participate as soon as you're interested.
And I'd like to add, although I am not an architect or an engineer, I do have my staff at SED are actually available by text this morning, so that if you ask questions, we're able to respond relatively quickly. What I can say, our experience at the state thus far is, to leverage from Julie's comment, is that we've had a lot of questions from school districts coming into the Office of Facilities Planning, and some of them are within the range of things that SED is issues that SED is familiar with in terms of the fire code. We've had in the work that we do, but there have been a lot of things that have been new and places where we've been asked to balance the challenges that we face because of the pandemic and the existing work that we've tried to do to keep kids safe from fire and structural issues in buildings. And that's the place where we've started conversations with our colleagues over at the Department of State and Health to sort of figure out how to balance those things. And that's really been a challenge to all of us, because we've all had to kind of rethink how, what our first principles are. Keeping kids safe is the first principle, but then we're so used to doing that in the old ways that try to think about how to do it in the new ways has posed a lot of challenges. And I will say that my colleagues at other agencies have been very supportive of the work. The Department of Health in particular has worked with our colleagues on answering questions. I'm not necessarily sure in the way that school facilities folks have always liked. We had some questions about ultraviolet light in buildings and use ways to reduce the viral loads in certain spaces, and Health worked very closely with us on that, and we got to some answers that were we can't do that right now because of other risks that they pose. But and that was, I think there were folks in the field that were a little frustrated by that response, but in terms of state agencies collaborating to communicate about an issue and send engineering specs back and forth to one another, it was good work on our part. And a lot of the smaller questions we have been able to get yes answers to, which is where we always prefer to end up. So I do hope that you'll have questions for us this morning and we can do a Q&A.
Not related to ultraviolet lights, Christina, but I know in my work, which is largely is acting as a distributor of the guidance when it comes out and then acting as a conduit between our clients and state agencies, the issue of the import of windows and opening and closing of windows has been a very hot topic. And I wonder if that's something maybe you wanted to touch on a little bit more, especially as we enter slightly colder winter months.
So I don't quite understand what's the question?
Well, some of the questions about can you maintain classrooms if you can't open the windows? Will it change the requirements around social distancing requirements? Will this overtax heating systems? And I wonder if the same kind of questions are coming into you.
I have not heard those questions, actually. What I've heard, you know, obviously there are buildings where the windows don't open, and other buildings that rely on the windows being open as part of their natural air management in the building, and ones that are sort of in between that. And we've had a lot of discussions about the impact of the virus and concerns about the virus in those different contexts, but.
I do see a question coming in the chat about essential workers. And this was something that came our way late yesterday via an email directly to Hinman and Christina. I mentioned this to you briefly last night, but that the most recent set of guidance from the Department of Health came out last week, which was essentially a flow chart, rather a series of 9 flow charts, depending on who you are, a teacher, some who would question reporting to work, a parent with a student, school personnel who may be faced with sending someone home. And baked within those flow charts, there were several references specifically tied to whether or not a school employee had to quarantine if they visited one of the states on the travel ban list, and expressly referred to school employees as non-essential employees who would be required to quarantine. For those of us working in the education space, on sort of the policy side, we noticed that as an immediate disconnect with prior guidance, because there was both the CDC guidance that was released as a part of the president's aggressive push for all schools to fully reopen in person in August that deemed teachers essential personnel, but also going back to really the onset of pause, where the primary driver for guidance had been coming through Empire State Development, in which local governments, including school districts, were deemed at least partially essential, and the determination about which employees did and did not need to report for essential functions had been left to the local governments. Conversations took place between county health and DOH, who confirmed, yes, it was their intent to state that all school districts are non-essential employees, all school district employers are non-essential. However, we do still have that question percolating with the governor's office directly, because even if that was DOH's intent, we think the most prudent course on a move forward basis, especially that we're looking at through the cluster intervention plan, potential forced shutdowns or movements to remote instruction, that we just want to make sure that the left hand and the right hand each know what the other's doing, and that ESD is fully aware that DOH has made this shift and that they intend this to cover everyone and not just folks who are traveling. So that is the determination from DOH at this point in time, is that school district employees are not essential, but we have pushed that up the chain for just a higher ruling from the governor's office directly. We're getting some more questions in here. Any guidelines on portable air purifiers?
Let me ask my colleagues on this one. I don't know. That would probably be a Department of Health commentary. That's because it's not part of the structure of the building. That's a piece that we would probably not be involved with, and I have not heard. I don't think that we've had questions about that one.
Okay. We can take that.
I can speak to the next question, which was lead sample testing due to the closure. And at this point, we have not. That deadline is actually in statute, and we have alerted. It's in the health law, and the regulations on that are actually owned by the Department of Health. We have alerted both the Department of Health and the elected officials that it might be a good idea to extend that, given the fact that the requirements for doing those tests require that the building be in full normal use, and many districts, even if they're open, are doing hybrid and other models that have the water being used less than normal. So we've alerted people that that's an issue and that they perhaps should consider extending it, but we don't have an answer on that yet.
Mm-hmm. Unless you want it, I can take this next one, Christina, about the weekly testing.
Yep, that's all you.
Okay, so I'm going to bifurcate that out and hope that I'm addressing your question, because I think there's two different things going on, and acknowledge that the way that they're referred to in the press colloquially is a little bit different than how they've actually played out. There's already live an existing dashboard that requires schools to report on testing as it is reported to them. Though it is widely referred to, including by a number of top policymakers, as the school districts performing the testing, the actual written mandate has not brought to bear a requirement that school districts actually perform the test, but there is a live dashboard that's reported daily to any person on campus. It's been going on since early September. But all the test results are the result of what's either reported verbally because a parent calls a student in sick, a teacher doesn't report to work and discloses why, contact tracing, or because information is reported from county health back to the school and then school reports it back to state and county health. What was announced yesterday is a new initiative, which would be the what the governor is calling the cluster action initiative, which is speaking not to every school building, but only to those school buildings that are in 6 cluster areas that are those zip code hotspots that had been identified late last week. So we're talking about Brooklyn and Queens, 2 locations in Queens, 1 in Brooklyn, Orange County, Rockland County, and part of Broome County, encompassing the areas of both the city of Binghamton, and looking like on the map, it's getting over into the Maine and kind of Vestal area, in which they drilled down and overlaid the actual test results that they've received, where they've been doing targeted testing in the last 5 to 7 days to get a larger sample in these high positivity areas. And based on that, essentially drew a mapped core in which a number of very stringent restrictions were put in place, including schools must go remote, non-essential businesses must close, incredibly tight limits on mass gatherings. Moving out from the red core center, there's then an orange zone in each of the clusters and a yellow zone at which the restrictions become less and less. When you get out to that yellow precautionary zone, which is the outer edge before you're non-impacted at this point in time, the Department of Health has been directed to put out regulations no later than Friday, or guidance, I believe, I shouldn't say regulations, that will deal with what that testing protocol looks like. The governor referred to it in his verbal comments yesterday almost as a random sampling, at which point the part of what the Department of Health is supposed to opine on by Friday is what those percentages look like, how many students, how many teachers, to be a valid sample. So we don't have the exact details on that. And what I also think will be fleshed out in that guidance that we don't know right now is that distinction of, is it actually going to be the responsibility of districts and schools to perform the tests, or as has been the case in prior references to school-based testing, will they be required to make arrangements for and demonstrate that those tests have been conducted? But until that guidance is released on Friday, we won't have significantly more detail on the tests and the specifics. The next time I see Christina talking for a minute, I will try and grab the link off my other screen and drop it in the chat box. But we can certainly share the press release that has the details on the hotspots and the maps with Robin as soon as this session is finished, and then she could push that out to the full group as well.
Sure, it sounds like it's my turn. I have a couple of things. I want to call everyone's attention first to the FAQs that we had posted on our facilities website. That they have tried to respond to the first wave of questions that came into school districts, and we do have a comment on that document about portable fans and window air conditioners and air cleaners. And so the first question we had was, are they allowed? And then the staff's response was that they are allowed, required that they meet guidance regarding, that the electricity is, the wiring is of good quality, so they don't pose a fire hazard. So yes to that. I would encourage you to review that FAQ on our website. And then on the someone had asked about contact at DOH regarding UV lighting products, and we have also in those FAQs some language about the UV lighting, and I believe we have a reference to a contact at DOH in there. So you may just want to go and take a look at that. So.
We have another down here asking about what is the best practice for the majority of schools for air quality during the winter, knowing that the current mechanics of HVAC, you can only give a certain amount of recirculating air. They were not designed to be like hospitals.
Right. So the general fire code standard is 65 degrees, and obviously there are limits. It's hard. I mean, you don't want to get people having frostbite in your buildings. I don't know what the best practice would be on this. This is one of those cases where people are going to have to balance different needs. But I guess the question is, what's the trade-off between keeping the windows open for protection against the virus and the temperatures? And I think this year we probably want to provide some flexibility on that temperature. It's not our standard, it's the fire code, and you may have issues where people are, express concern about the temperature in the rooms. When they go up and down, we get complaints, but certainly I think this year you can expect people to be a little bit more flexible, and that's probably the best way to do it. Give yourself a broader range.
So I just hopped over to the Q&A, which is a separate box from the chat where we've been reading from. There continues to be another question on UV lights, which I know we talked about a little bit, and that needs to come from DOH.
Yes.
That we can certainly, and by we I mean mostly Christina, can take back and see if there's any updated guidance. But the next question is about the requirement and to register as a building if you've had to rent storage containers for furniture storage to allow for social distancing. Can you provide any sort of insight on that and what might be coming?
I think we posted an update on that. I mean, we did distinguish between pods and spaces that have people in them. But if it is school district, if it's a building, let's talk about not a pod, but a building you're using. If the school district is leasing the space, we do need to know where it is, because that is just consistent with our long-standing practice that we know where public districts have space. So you need to tell us that. We have tried to streamline that process so that it doesn't pose a significant burden for you. And obviously we know that a lot of this is temporary, so we haven't been looking to create, to build up long, big long processes for people to get into this. But we did want to know where school district employees might be, for instance. But again, that's a place where we updated our guidance a little bit, because we know that the first pass was, it wasn't worded as well as it should have been, and so it wasn't as clear as it needed to be. And I think there was a lot of confusion because we weren't clear enough. And so I would encourage people to look back again at the FAQs, because I think you'll see a clarification that works better for people. That was our intent. We've been learning as we're going through this too, so.
And just to let folks know too, anywhere where there's specific questions about recent guidance, for example, Department of Health guidance that made the essential worker language, that too, like the announcement and the maps of the cluster areas is all something we could package and send to Robin just to redistribute to the group after this. I fear I'm not quite quick enough to probably find all those things and just post them in the chat, and then you might not have them later. So we will also be, so we can take care of that after the fact. While we're working through all this, I know that many of you had sort of a tough transition in the spring, moving to remote working, but I know SED had to make that transition at a pretty large scale as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. We had some processes that we just had to pause during the pause, particularly taking in paper plans, because we couldn't get people into the building to get them and so on. But other parts of the office were able to continue their work pretty well. And now that we have, now that we're back, what a lot of the staff are doing is working a mixed schedule that allows them to do paper reviews and move that part of the process along when they're in the office, and do electronic reviews outside. And so we haven't seen, we've seen a couple of the queue's gotten a little bit longer in terms of the review waits than it was, say, 6 months ago, but it hasn't been huge. And despite the fact that we have a couple of staff vacancies, it hasn't gotten as bad as I feared it might, to be honest. And because we have been moving more and more to electronic, I mean, these transitions take a long time in the state, but because we'd already been part of the working on the processes and streamlining them, we were better positioned to handle this than we might have been. So some of the staff are more comfortable being in the office every day. So it has worked pretty well for the Office of Facilities Planning. We haven't had big dislocations.
So you raise a really interesting point about the queue, because I know that, again, in working with districts very early on, first a partial stop and then not a stop and a slowdown, and frankly, some confusion even out in the field about whether or not the shutdown of commercial construction applied to school districts, or if as municipalities, they were sort of allowed to proceed. Part of the angst I think people felt was there's such a limited window to do school construction projects.
Right.
And if I stop now, what does that do? So have you felt like things have pretty much stayed on track, and any queue growth is more just related to a slowdown in review? Or did you note a sort of notable shift because of construction issues?
Well, I think there were construction issues because people, but it wasn't so much. I mean, I think you, on behalf of your clients, got that clarified, right? When coming out of that, you should get credit for that one, though. You squared that away, and it was once that was clarified, the districts were certainly able to move forward. I think there were a lot of districts we heard around the state that had challenges getting people who could do the work. So the work was permitted, but it was hard to do it because the gap. So that was a problem that people faced. But in terms of what was coming into our office, I think there has been a slowdown, but I would actually attribute it more to economic uncertainty. Like I believe that there are districts that had kind of projects that were maybe not emergency projects where the roof has been ripped off the building because of a storm or something. It was something more along the lines of, like, we really like a really flash STEM classroom. Some of those ones where there's a little bit of wiggle room, I think there's been a pause there, and districts are just wanting to wait and see what happens with the economy. So that's helped us keep the queue down. But a lot of where it is, it's gotten longer because we had some vacancies, and one of the problems is state hiring takes so long that we had people sort of leave as sort of normal attrition prior to the pandemic, and we were still in the process of hiring when the state, because of its fiscal circumstances, needed to hold on all the hiring. Unless the person like in the part of the emergency response to COVID, we wouldn't hire. So we've had basically a complete stop on hiring for 6 months. And that's hard. And, I think they're starting to look to the place of saying, okay, now what positions are essential health and safety positions, not just COVID anymore, but health and safety, and school facilities is clearly in that group. So I'm optimistic that we'll be able to fill some of those things. But in the meantime, the team is moving forward on the work that it's been doing with respect to streamlining reviews and so the queue hasn't been as long as I feared, as I said.
Right. I wonder if people are also there for projects experiencing supply chain issues. I say as a woman who's been trying to get a new deck put on her house for 3 months now. If you can't get 10 by 10 square feet of laminate wood, I'd imagine major capital construction has also experienced some slowdown.
I think there have been gaps out there. I haven't heard, we tend to be involved at the beginning of a project and at the end of a project. So I don't know as much about the middle phase, which is where you would run into those kind of things. But we have heard through the grapevine of some issues along the way.
Okay, so we're getting a revisit for some more information on the question of the use of shipping containers as storage facilities, and some guidance from the architect using his read for the regulations that they need to be submitted, essentially registered as buildings, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Yeah, I think we exempted shipping containers that people weren't going to be in.
And I think, that's something.
We did not exempt spaces that people would be in on a regular basis. And we had tried to, because of this exact issue that Warren is raising, that people were telling us was going to cost too much. And we were like, oh, we didn't mean to do that. So places that you're just going to put things in and shut the door don't require that. Places that people are going to be in. If you're extending the space, the occupied space, then we do need to know.
And Christina, is that in guidance that we could ship out to the group?
I thought so, yeah.
So we'll make sure and include that in writing as a part of the follow-up information that we send with relevant guidance and FAQs after this is over. This is another one, I think, unfortunately for you, Christina. Can you comment on HVAC filtration requirements to safely host music class within an interior space with no windows?
Actually, I think that's a Department of Health question. So I'm gonna punt that to you, Julie, because you're the Department of Health today.
I probably should have added. I should have taken Christina's invitation to make an opening comment and say I do not work for nor represent the Department of Health, but I'm certainly happy to share any information that they shared with me.
Yeah, right. I mean, they have specifically asked us to not comment on matters like that. So,
what I can say is I've not seen express guidance to the scenario you described. As you've probably read, there are very express requirements around both music and PE and enhanced social distancing requirements for an indoor space with no windows. I would want to take that back to them because I don't think I've seen that specific scenario addressed. And I would not want to, I would not want to extrapolate on their behalf if it's not something that they've spoken to. Is there guidance for panic bars and ventilation and storage units?
Yeah, the question is it's Eric stating it, and the team is telling me that these are essentially discovered building submissions. So there is a submission, but our intention was to reduce the requirements. So let me get back to them, and that's a matter that we will work through and have something on our website too. That it's going to require some thought on that one.
Kristen, can I hop back to your music question, just because when I take it back, can I assume expressly when you talk about a music class, you would be talking about either a engaging in choral activity or some sort of wind instrument, something like that. That just might be a detail that would impact their answer for that scenario. You can also feel free to email me directly. Mm-hmm. Chorus and band. Okay, so I'll take that back. Mm-hmm. Are there any further updates on the testing or updates on the use of needlepoint bipolar ionizers?
No updates. This is one of those issues that we had worked with the Department of Health on, and I don't believe that they were quite there with using them yet, but we've had some different vendors come to us, and I'm sure they've come to you too, with all kinds of different devices, and DOH is thinking about which ones are they're comfortable with and which they're not. So that's one that's a work in progress.
I'm scrolling back up to me. Oh, I see something over in the Q&A now. Oh, so this is a question about the flowcharts and that came out as part of the toolkit last week and the 48 hours. I would say that it would be a hotly contested question whether or not the 48-hour presumptive positive guidance or the essential work guidance has been the hottest of hot topics since the guidance came out last week. Just for clarity, for everyone participating, the 48 hours is a presumptive positive that if you are symptomatic and therefore referred for diagnostic testing, if you either refuse a test or do not share the results with the district is directed to treat that test as a presumptive positive if they don't have the results within 48 hours, which then triggers whatever the next steps are. Certainly, it means the individual in question is now directed to quarantine until they're released by the Department of Health, whatever protocols, both in guidance and within the school's individual plan for return to school have to be followed. But what is slowly emerging in conversations over the last probably 24 hours, honestly, is that it's having a ripple effect with county officials because some departments of health have slightly more rigorous protocols still than others with regard to what happens if you have a positive in a classroom. And from what I understand speaking to many of the county Department of Health as well as superintendents around the state is Monday of this week was really as soon as many of them were able to sit down with their school districts and provide any updated local guidance based on the state guidance. And some of them, the interpretation is that they have been told you cannot return either as an employee or school district until you either have the negative test or the 14 days. And then it is within that county, those determinations are being made. Is that complete classroom closed down? Is it a building closed down? And some of those are being made on a case-by-case basis. But the one thing that seems to be relatively consistent is rich, poor, rural, urban, suburban, upstate, downstate. Almost no one is getting a test back in 48 hours with the exception of the rapid test, which increasingly is not being accepted as a valid negative because of accuracy issues. So this is something that we're actually right sort of in the thick of trying to work through and address with both state and county DOH, SED, and school districts. We are working on both this just in the interest of disclosure, and in this instance, I mean the we being Hinman Straub on behalf of FSA, work very closely with the BOCES Educational Consortium, New York State School Boards Association, and the New York State Council of School Superintendents that are all working collectively to try and resolve this and make sure there's an understanding that there's just not enough testing capacity and reagent to process tests in 48 hours, and that as there are direct orders from the top to engage in even more testing, for example, in the cluster areas, that's only going to lessen the ability of diagnostic or elimination tests in other parts of the state and county.
If I can add to that, Julie, I think that this particular issue demonstrates a broader one that we have been urging the Department of Health to work with its counties on, which is that the issue that different counties, because some of them have added extra, more rigorous conditions on top, the standards with other matters, not just the timing issue that you just talked, are different, and that's hard, and it's hard, particularly for BOCES that cross counties, and and a lot of school districts cross counties. So that's an issue that we too are working on, the Department of Health, urging them to have the counties be as consistent as possible across the board. And I know the Superintendent's Association is doing the same thing, because we've talked with them about the differential impacts of different rules in different counties.
And I want to note, though, I think the effort of the toolkit, the intent behind it was to create more unanimity in the sort of first round of questions. The if X, then Y, if somebody tests positive, what do I do? If somebody has symptoms, what do I do? But the next ripple effect out of what that unanimity has led to will need to lead to another round of conversations. And because of the number of players that need to be involved, we haven't resolved that to everyone's satisfaction yet. And I think because of the uptick in infections, certainly that's taken some capacity out of the Department of Health to deal with the more preventative actions that they would put this toolkit over in. I'm just quickly glancing over to make sure we aren't missing anything.
So a lot of the questions today have been sort of questions clarifying the existing guidance that we have out. And I want to note that we're at a phase that now that school started, we've all kind of caught our breath internally at SED. We're starting to think about, okay, if we were going to take another crack at that guidance, what would it look like? What would it cover? What do we need to do? What do we need to tweak? And I think you've raised, the audience has actually raised some really nice issues today that we will make sure that we tweak in that guidance. But I'm wondering if there are areas that we did not cover at all that as school facilities leaders you wish we had discussed. And obviously my areas are transportation and facilities, and the ones that are in the health area, we've again been encouraged to work with the Department of Health on and defer to them. But if there are things you would have liked us to have discussed that we didn't, I'd be very grateful for that. Suggestions and comments.
While folks are thinking about what they might want to add, we just wanted to reiterate that so much of this is a rolling process, and I think anything that is true today may have to shift based on new information and new circumstances. We're all still learning. The doctors are still learning, the scientists are still learning, and as they learn, so do we. But that, from the advocacy standpoint, at least that SFA really tries to remain completely coordinated with NISBA, NISCUS, and our BOCES, DSs in, identifying questions, identifying areas of consistency versus areas of inconsistency, and surfacing those up to the executive chamber, the division of the budget, SED, DOH, and whatever the appropriate agency is, because I think that's where we can add some enhanced value, because we are able to really identify very quickly where there actually are consistencies and inconsistencies, but also try and get uniform answers, because I think it can be very easy to get pulled into a regional lull. And this is an actual example of something that's already happened to me several times this week, where I'll hear from a small group of school leaders who tell me, this is the guidance that's coming out of every DOH. But then I call a different region of the state, and it's everyone in this part of the state is saying it, but this state part is saying something different. And then if I go to the middle, the two next to each other don't even agree. But then in other examples, we're able to identify pretty quickly, it actually is uniform throughout the state, but it doesn't match what we might be hearing from state sources. So that's part of where we're trying to act on your behalf. You know, in addition to, I know you're thinking about what you're working on for what you might or might not wish that had been addressed in the guidance. You know, any observations or feedback you can provide us about how are things going with compliance. I know that a lot of concerns that were raised early on were difficulty in keeping kids in masks and getting kids to sit in a assigned seat on the school bus. I'm not a parent, but I have a lot of parents in my immediate circle around me, and quite frankly, it sounds like a lot of the kid compliance is going better than adult compliance in BJ's, and I wonder what you might be seeing there. I have a question that came in just revisiting our conversation about the issue with the 48-hour testing. What I have been told anecdotally is that some medical professionals are not relying on the rapid tests. This is reported to me from school districts, you know, as they get clearance from their counties without a subsequent PCR test for a true negative elimination if you're trying to eliminate someone for a return to school because of concerns about false negatives, but that that's a determination being made by the medical professionals.
There's a question in the chat about how emergency projects will be handled and processed. So we did, as part of the reopening guidance, commit to, and we fulfilled our commitment to prioritize projects that were associated with social distancing and reopening. So that we almost separated out from a regular emergency project, but normal emergency projects continue to be expedited. That won't change. I suspect that some of the question here is asking about the definition of emergency projects and what counts. And with respect to that, we actually had a couple of school districts right before the start of school get hit with some very bad weather-related issues, and on those we've used those as examples to talk to the state controller's office, which is the guiding agency on what counts as an emergency for the purposes of the bidding requirements under the general municipal law. So we've been pressing for flexibility on that, and there's language in that statute that we have argued gives flexibility with respect to the pandemic. We don't have an answer yet. So it's a new way of looking at things for them too, and they have not yet agreed that this is the kind of life-threatening issue that they want to eliminate bidding requirements for. But we have the opportunities of late summer that were provided to us, unfortunately, because of weather and the pandemic, did open some conversations. So any changes coming forward with how standard building projects will be processed with the staggering of the BCS? Well, the intention of the staggering of the BCS was that the office would not be subject to the same boom and bust cycles that it had been in the past, where, you know, after the BCS, you know, the 18 to say 36 months after the BCS is conducted tends to see a lot of projects come in the old iteration where everybody did it on a 5-year cycle. The queues would be so long because our staffing didn't ebb and flow in the same way that it would be almost a year before the districts would, you know, get their projects before a reviewer. The intention of the BCS was to divide up the projects coming in so that it's more cyclical, and it's, you know, every year a different group would be in that 18 to 36 months window. So the hope is that the review process won't change, but that naturally, because there won't be everybody coming in at once, that the flow and the timelines would be more predictable for school districts. And of course, at the same time, the offices continue to work on a number of initiatives to, you know, improve the process and make the process quicker anyway, because shorter predictable queues are essential for everybody, and that has been a priority. So we've and I've talked about this in communications to the field, but we've continued to work on the upgrade to our computer system, which will facilitate tracking better, more effectively internally, and make it easier for us to do a lot of the aspects of our work so that we have more time to review and enable us to provide youth better information about projects that have happened in the past as well. So that project continues, and in fact, we were given some money even within the fiscal emergency that the state's in to continue that work, because that's considered a priority project for all of us. So that's the PIMS upgrade, and it is moving forward. FAQs are on our website. I don't have a link. Unfortunately, my link is, we'll try to send it. We'll send it afterward.
So we've got a question. Does the
Another
state
question.
have a cheat sheet for schools? I cannot answer that off the top of my head. They've had consistent ongoing guidance. I think much like the state, it has been rolling. But that when we pull all the SED guidance we've referred to during this conversation, as well as the governor's link, which I was only able to share quickly because it's still open on my computer from last night. So I was able to just drop it in the chat, but we'll include that, all the maps for the cluster areas, the SED guidance and FAQs.
Right.
I'll also hop over to CDC and just see what the most up-to-date school guidance is, and send that around. And we'll share that with Robin, who will make sure everyone gets it.
Right.
As long as that's okay with you, Robin.
Absolutely.
I see another question, just referring back to our conversation about the possibility of extending the lead testing date extension.
So that date is in statute, and we definitely know that we want tests that are valid for the purposes that are done, and it's easier to do when it is necessary to do those tests when the building's in full use. So we have alerted the Department of Health and legislative folks to just maybe give an extension on that.
But at this point in time, just procedurally, that would have to be either a change in statute or an executive order.
Yes, exactly.
Statute, just procedurally.
Right.
It's not something that the regions can act on.
It's completely not us. I mean, it is, as I had noted before, it's in the health, the requirements in the health law, and it's the requirement is in the health regulation. So, and I think that you have to understand that these state agencies, their staffing didn't grow as much as they needed to in an emergency like this. So there's only a certain amount of bandwidth for them, and their health is very much focused on the pandemic and what's been happening there. And I think some of these other things, like it's clearly this question is a consequence of the pandemic. It wouldn't come up otherwise. It would be assumed that everyone would do the lead testing this year, but then when there's a delay, like they just don't have the bandwidth to say, okay, we need to adjust this date by December 31st. And frankly, obviously it's October, and getting, they need to tell you now if you don't have to do it, because if you do have to do it, you need to get started on it now.
And I think, just again, looking at this purely procedurally, this is a perhaps limitation of the executive orders. I think that I actually had several legislative meetings where we talked about the topic of the executive orders and the enhanced powers to waive and suspend and modify laws through that process. And any number of legislators, despite their desire to be engaged, would say, in the midst of this crisis, that was necessary. It's necessary to be able to act quickly, but there are by design, some limitations on what the governor can do with that power. And one of the blessings and the curses is that the executive orders issued through this process are limited to 30 days in duration. So between both lack of capacity, but also just practicality, it's sometimes difficult to get statutory modifications addressed practically when you need them, because you need to know now if you need to start your lead testing. But if the governor issues an executive order tomorrow waiving the deadline of the 31st, it actually automatically expires 30 days from now. So it would have to be reissued. So I think it's certainly worth continuing those conversations to get at least some perhaps guidance, but recognizing that there's actually a method to the madness of why, for example, you'll probably hear about this within your buildings, every 30th day, there's a little bit of angst about whether or not school boards will be able to continue to meet remotely, because it's actually a deliberative choice that's being made by the executive to wait until the 30th day to renew it, because then he gets a full 30 days out of it. After the 5th or 6th or 7th renewal, my anxiety has gone down considerably, and I'm just trusting that it will be renewed. But I don't have to run a board meeting on Tuesday when the 30th day is Monday. So it's certainly something we'll keep conversations up on, though, and see what information we can glean. I see this questions. Are there issues if we test buildings now that are fully occupied?
I don't think so. I mean, that would certainly make sense. I would do what I could, because we don't have, there's no guarantee at this point that requirement's going to be extended. So I would do what you can, but obviously you want the test to be valid too. If you have an occupied building, it would make sense. I just don't know how that would work with a vendor you would have do the work. So, but that's, if you can do that with your vendor, that would make a lot of sense. So back to the topic of the shipping containers, I've been having a conversation with my staff about that, and they do tell me that they were requiring a sign and seal on those. They were surprised by the prices that you were getting charged. So given the fact that the prices are so high, they haven't had a lot of questions about those, but we'll take a look at what we're requiring, because obviously $8,000 is a lot of money. So that was, I wasn't right about the exemption piece, but I think that the team was surprised at the price that you were quoted there. So
I think Robin's trying to usher us off the stage, but I do just see one follow-up from Jim, which is a question about timing of the next cycle. And if I'm hopping back up to your prior question, I'm assuming that's the next cycle of lead testing. Yes.
I don't know what that would be something that because this is in statute and it's a regulation that's owned by the Department of Health, that they would have to work out. Obviously, it would make sense if people feel like 5 years is the right amount of time, that there may be an extension on the other end, or they may just say, assuming they do extend it, which they have not done yet, the next cycle might operate again on the 5 years, and just extend out from that. We'd have to. It would depend on the language that.
Something that, and I'll make this my parting thought so that Robin really can usher us off the stage, but that to the extent that you have your listserv or have even just a back of the napkin calculation, I think in conversations with the Department of Health in the second floor, having a sense of percentage of buildings that actually think they have enough occupancy to perform a successful test. In addition to all the things I'm not a representative of DOH, I'm not an attorney, I am not an expert on the specifics of the lead testing, though I frankly spent far more time on it back in my time at school boards than I really ever want to think about again. But I know that there's a lot of requirements that got fleshed out on the back end of that about water flow and usage. And, you know, when I think about occupancy, in my mind, I'm then starting to question, well, what would be full occupancy? You know, if I only have 50% of my kids, does that meet the standard? And to the extent that you have that sense from working with your vendors or prior testing, having an understanding of who can mechanically do this or who simply just has so few people in the building that it doesn't make sense, I think would help push those conversations forward, because it would better frame the question of what's needed to make this effective and to meet the ultimate goal that DOH still fundamentally wants to meet, which is they want these test results, they want them to be valid. And so having them understand what the sort of state of play is may help move that conversation along.
Excellent point. That really does help. I mean, the legislative people always want to know, like, what are we talking about here? So I think that's a great point, Julie. And I think that's probably a good place for us to close. And thank you, everyone, for your good questions. You've given me lots of things to take back to my team and work on. And that's one of the benefits of these sessions from our perspective. So thank you very much.
And hopefully we can do this in a real room with real people this time next year.
Amen.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you both for being with us this morning. And I know I speak on behalf of the 140 people who have joined us this morning, and in saying this has been so beneficial. And we just appreciate your candor and sharing everything that you know with us. And I also want to give a shout out to Jim Carr from Hinman Straub. Jim, say hello. Who has been sitting quietly in the background. And who helped us set up this session with Christina and Julie, and who does so much for us year round in terms of our advocacy for the association. So thank you, Jim, for all you do for us.
Likewise. Thank you, Robin.
And so next up is our virtual exhibit hall. We hope everyone will make their way there and join our vendors for the next 30 minutes or so. And then after that, we have our next set of concurrent sessions. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Christina. And thank you, Jim. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.